Here we go.
Hi, I am Stephanie Burke, President of the Liberty Grove Historical Society. I apologize, we were having some technical difficulties, but we worked through them. I am sitting here with Mr. James Ingwersen, and we are on the property of James and Phyllis Ingwersen Homestead. And we are going to do a little bit of history about James, a little bit of history of James and Phyllis, and then we are going to explore their grounds. So it's a beautiful property. We can't wait to share this with all of you. And so first off, I'd like to have a little chat with Mr. Ingwersen. So I have to share, I have, when I first mentioned to my board my how I knew Mr. Ingwersen is that I waited on him and Phyllis for 20 years. Most of you know I was a waitress up at the Viking, and I waited on Jim and Phyllis for 20 years. I had the pleasure of their company usually every Thursday morning. That was one of their mornings they would come in, but I had always had a lovely chat with the both of them. So it is an honor for me to be here at his home today. So this is Mr. Ingwersen, and I'd like to ask him a few questions, and we're going to learn a little bit about him and his life here on Old Stage Road. So Jim, first off, when did you purchase the property here on Old Stage Road?
1970. We were living in a tree studio building in Chicago for many years, and it was a one-room studio, and we were at a tower studio. It meant that we had 3 exposures to the sun all day long, and then during the summer, the studio just, you couldn't cool it down no way, because these windows in the studio were like 10 feet by 10 feet, and there's no way of really protecting it from the outside sun. And so we were looking for a place to get out of Chicago during the summertime. So I brought Phyllis up here in 1960 on probably the coldest day of November, cold and cloudy and really awful. And we stayed in the old Anderson Hotel in Ephraim. And the Anderson Hotel in those days was quite an antique at that time, and the floors not only looked like a hammock, but the beds were also like a hammock. And Phyllis said, "Get me out of here." This is the first time I had her in Door County. I used to come up as a child. My folks used to rent in Ephraim and bring us up in the summertime. So I had plenty of exposure to Door County. In fact, when I was in high school, 2 friends of mine and I, we camped in the park the 3rd month of the summer. And so I was very familiar with Door County. And so Phyllis said, "Get me out of this place. I can't handle this." So we ended up in a little town in southern Wisconsin by the name of Twin Lakes, and we lived there for 5 years. And one day we decided that we should take a ride around the Big Lake. So we went over and came back and stopped in Door County, and it was a beautiful spring day, and it was just a gorgeous day. And Phyllis, where we were staying, I forgot where we were staying, but she saw the key to the door. She saw music, theater, art, and this little town of Twin Lakes, the the cultural thing was about 36 saloons. That was about it. That was the culture. So this was like opening up Pandora's box and saying, wow, look at this. Isn't this wonderful? So I said, well, should we start looking for a place up there? And she said, yeah. So we went to Mr. Kermit Kelstrom's office, who was a very prominent real estate man at the time. And we told him, I kind of explained to him that I wanted an old farm and something with some character to it. And so he took us around, and he probably took us around for about 4 or 5 hours, and there was nothing that turned me on that he was showing me. And I said, no, none of those properties appeal to me. He said, well, I have one more. And he brought me over to the farm, and I said, this is it. And he had bought it for his son, and something happened to his son. I'm not sure exactly what happened to him, but I guess he no longer, I guess he had died or something, because Kermit said that he no longer needed the farm, and he told me how much it cost, and I thought, wow, that's an amazing price for the house and the buildings and the 40 acres that came with the 40 acres. And so they said it's a deal, so we made the deal and became proud owners of the property in Door County. So it was quite an experience, and it's been quite an experience ever since. We immediately knew what we wanted to do with the place. The main house was pretty much plastered over on the inside, and I'd been told that there's log underneath the plaster. So if you really want to make a mess of your life, start tearing plaster off the wall. And deal with all that dust and dirt. But we finally got it all cleaned up, and we got some people to come in and re-chink the logs, and it became livable again. And that's kind of the story of how I came to be in Door County.
So Jim, you, I didn't tell anybody what your occupation was. So I don't think construction was your background. Can you tell everybody what your occupation in life was?
My occupation was a portrait painter. I painted people for a living, and this was perfect because having these extra buildings that I could turn into a studio, and it really was really wonderful the way these buildings helped me establish my life, so to speak, up here. And then we decided to open one of the buildings as a gallery, and the powers that be in Sturgeon Bay said, no, you can't do that. Because I had other people's work. They said, if you were a cottage industry, that means you produce all of the material that you're selling. That's one thing, but to represent other people, that's verboten. So I said, okay, well, I'll just call my friends and tell them to come pick up the paintings, and I'll just keep my paintings in the gallery, which worked out fine over the years. was very good to me. I always bless myself because I could make a living at what I love to do best, which was picking paintbrush and paint. So it was all really wonderful.
So, of your works, what are you most known for?
My portraits,
Is there one in particular? Or a series in particular?
there was I had been commissioned by a family in Indiana to paint their daughter, whose name was Gretchen. And so they only wanted a head of her, so I did a head for them. And as I was looking through the photographs that I'd taken of this little girl, it was just a charming pose, and so I made a painting of that pose. And we sent it down to the Illinois State Fair, and it won the popular prize down there. And so they brought it back to Chicago with the other winners, and put it in a bank window, and a publisher from New York was passing the bank, and he saw the painting, and he called me and he asked me if he could publish it. I said, sure. So he published it, and then he said, well, I need a little boy to go along with the little girl. And I didn't know anybody none of my friends had a child that age, and so I decided, well, I'll go to a model agency see if I can find a child that age, which I did, and I did find a child, and did a painting of him, and became a pair with Gretchen, and end of story.
And what was his name?
Gary.
So it was Gretchen and Gary.
Gary and Gretchen, right. They became famous all over they published them all over the country, and all over people would come back from Europe and say, Jim, I saw your paintings of Gary and Gretchen. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So I was very impressed, and they were very impressed, and everybody else has been very impressed ever since. So
I don't think Door County or Liberty Grove residents realize that they have a world-renowned artist here in Sister Bay, Liberty Grove. I encourage anybody that's watching to just Google Gary and Gretchen paintings, and Jim's paintings will come up. So yeah. It's not just me here that's with Jim. I have a few of my board members here, but also here with us today is Lisa Bly, the lovely Lisa Bly, who is assisting Jim, and she is going to help us with a little bit of the history here at the homestead, a little bit more on Jim and Phyllis, and then a little bit about the grounds. We're going to do a tour of the grounds. So Lisa, why don't you sit down here so you're comfy? And why don't you...
I was going to ask Jim a couple more questions, if
Yeah.
that's okay with you.
Yes.
So Jim, tell us a little bit about the teacher in high school, about the inspiration that he was to you.
Well, I had switched high schools, when I was a junior in high school, thanks to my father deciding to buy in another town.
To rent again in another town?
And I hadn't never taken an art class in high school, so I took an art class at Evanston Township, and the teacher was named Mr. Trussis, and he was very, very encouraging to me. He really admired what I could do with a paintbrush. And so he said, Jim, you ought to, when you finish high school, you ought to go right into art school. So I picked the American Academy of Art, which is a traditional representational school, where you learn how to paint representationally. And so I spent 4 years at the American Academy, and then spent a couple of years with Uncle Sam in the Army.
Can I stop you there? Because I know there's a great story that I want to tell when we get to the gallery. So, Jim went to college. He met a most wonderful woman. And will you tell us a little bit about this woman that you met?
Well, as I came out of the Army, I had a girl when I went into the Army, but I got a dear John during my period. When I got out, I had no girlfriend, so I had a friend that his girlfriend worked at an advertising agency in Chicago, and she said, I know this cute little redhead that works there, and you might be interested in meeting her. And I said,
You're fabulous.
All right, here we go. Here we go.
I met this redheaded girl.
I met this redheaded girl with, her name was Phyllis, and she was as cute as her friend said she was. Mm-hmm. But she was a very popular young lady, so I had a hard time getting a date with her because she was booked most of the time. So,
You were persistent.
I was persistent, and finally I guess she felt sorry for me, and she said, come over for dinner. And I said, oh, wonderful. And she lived down in the near north side of Chicago. She had an apartment with some other girls. And so I came over there with my little bottle of wine, and it was kind of interesting. I walked in the door, and she was all in a flutter. And I said, what's the problem? And she said, well, I just mopped the floor in the bathroom, and I had this big box of Tide, and I set it down on the wet cement, the wet tile, and when I went to pick it up, the bottom fell out, and all this Tide went all over the floor. So I was down on my hands and knees picking up Tide.
And that was your first date.
Yeah, that was the first thing. And on the menu that night was beans and hot dogs.
Beans and hot dogs.
Beans and hot dogs.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. That was delicious, and I loved it all.
And I think you were persistent for a couple of years, Jim, right? With this little redheaded girl?
Yeah, she was a very elusive thing. In fact, I had asked her to marry me, and we had been going together for 7 years, so that was quite a while.
Wow.
So we'll tell the whole story on that. So you just talked about marriage, though, right? Did you have a ring when you asked her about marriage, Jim? No? Okay, tell us that story, Jim.
Okay, so she ended up going to Philadelphia, and she had a job in Philadelphia at Wanamaker's bookstore, and I had told my sister, I said, I'm so frustrated because I asked this little girl to marry me, and she runs off to Philadelphia. So, and my sister said, well, did you buy her a ring or anything to show your intent? And I said, no, that's so plebeian for me.
tell you to do?
He said, I'm gonna take you right down to the jeweler and we're gonna pick out something. And I said, well, I want anything but a diamond. I mean, that's too much of a cliche for me. So we picked out this pretty little pearl ring, and I called the airport and ordered a plane to go to Philadelphia and put the ring in my pocket and off I went.
And
As soon as I handed her the ring, she said, okay, all right, let's get married. So we went to the justice of the peace,
Wow.
okay, tell us more.
and we were sitting in the kind of pews that they had for people waiting for the justice to marry them. And in front of me was two gals, and one was getting a divorce, and she was telling her friend how horrible marriage was, and listening to this. It was quite disturbing. Yeah.
But it didn't scare Phyllis away.
Well, it didn't scare us away.
Did not scare you away.
Yeah.
So then you drove back to Chicago. Did you drive back to Chicago?
We drove back to Chicago. We rented a car and drove back. And I had left the place. I was living in a one-room studio that I was telling you about. And I just gotten on the plane and left. I didn't do a dish. I didn't make my bed. I didn't do anything.
Oh boy.
So when Phyllis walked in the door and she saw this mess of how a bachelor lives, she practically turned around and walked back out the door. She really did restrain herself. And we spent our honeymoon night in a single bed. That was the bed that I had in the studio. And it was very cozy, and I suppose apropos for newlyweds.
Absolutely. What year was that, Jim?
That was 1960.
1960.
1960. Yeah. And we had a wonderful life.
Now I believe Phyllis was a little bit of an artist as well. Jim, right?
Oh, yeah, she was.
What was her degree in Jim?
Artist. She had a master's degree in art education, and she kept throwing that in my face and saying, you know, I'm really the well-educated artist. You're just a technical guy. So,
Was she right or was she not right, Jim?
well, she had a perfect eye. And if she criticized my painting and she said something was wrong, I had better fix it because she was generally right. If the client would come in and say, well, maybe there's something just a little bit wrong here.
And they were like, oh darn, that Phyllis said that to me. Why didn't I listen to her? Is that what happened?
That's what
I'm sure she never said, Mr. Ingwersen, did you not listen to me on that?
no, she never got that crude.
No, good. Jim, tell us a little bit about alla prima. What is alla prima? And can you explain what that is, Jim?
It's a form of direct painting where you mix the color and the value and the drawing all in one brushstroke, and don't touch it. You leave it. It's a very fresh way of painting. It's a very difficult way of painting because you can't go and recorrect mistakes that you made. And so you're kind of stuck with what you put down on the canvas.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the $1 million question. Have you ever made a mistake when you're painting, Jim?
During the sketch class, I had a friend by the name of Will Johnson. And Will was a very fine painter. And he used to say to me, Jim, you know, you had that really nice a half hour ago.
But he didn't tell you, did he?
No. So I was, that's the message. If you overwork something, sometimes it just gets really boring.
You're a renowned artist, James Ingwersen. Not only for oil, but you also have a pretty good love, and very phenomenal with pastels. Tell us a little bit about, is there one over the other that you prefer, Jim, or tell us a little bit about that.
Well, pastel is a dry medium. It's a pigment mixed with chalk, and it's a one-go medium. It's so easily to work it's a very simple medium to work with because it's always the same. It's never, oil is always someplace between wet and dry, and pastel you can go 20 years after you've done the painting and work on it like it was yesterday, and so it's a very nice, it's a really wonderful medium to work in.
Is there any artist that you have resembled or looked up to, Jim, in your career that's really important to you, Jim?
Well, you know, there's so many beautiful artists that have gone through history that they're just all inspiration. You look at their work and you think, this is really marvelous stuff, and these guys really knew what they were doing.
So, we know that you're a world-renowned artist. We know that you gave a lot to the community. I'm going to show you in a little bit about some of the artwork. I'll show you some commissioned work. I'll show you some landscapes, as well as I'll show you all kinds of portraits. So Mr. Ingwersen had a lot of sketch classes. You want to tell us a little bit about how you offered, and what were sketch classes, Jim?
Well, I just opened my studio to friends and kind of the public. Anybody that wanted to come and bring their equipment and draw and from the model could. And so we set up this sketch class, and Phyllis was our great model finder. She would go out and find all these wonderful faces for us to paint, and it was a lot of fun. And we made there was a lot of very good artists that came to the sketch class.
I think there were a lot of good artists that came to the sketch class, and I know that there's a lot of good artists that you helped to create and to help them become great artists. In fact, we've had many of them come to the studio this year, last year, and years past, coming with open arms saying thank you for helping to make my career, and thank you, Mr. Ingwersen, for helping me to be who I am. In fact, we've got a young lady coming on Tuesday of next week who will be coming to the gallery. So after many sketch classes, I believe Mr. Ingwersen always opened up his property and had a lot of barn dances and lots of celebrations, and was all about community. And you want to tell a little bit about
Square dances?
Yeah, and
well, that was kind of a tragic story. We had about once a week we had a square dance in the barn, and it was a potluck. People would bring their picnics, and we would have potlucks outside, and it was a lot of fun. And then we'd dance afterward, and until one night in 1980, in August of 1980, we'd had the square dance and the potluck, and Phyllis and I had already gone to bed. It was fairly early yet, and I looked out the window and I saw this rosy glow in the sky, and I said, I haven't been in bed that long that the sun is coming up. So I ran downstairs and looked out the front door, and the barn was ablaze. And just as I was coming down, the fire truck pulled in the yard, and they started squirting the existing building because they didn't want that to catch fire. So they saved that and kind of saved the house, because if that building had burned, the house would have burned too. So I would have been totally wiped out. But it so happened that night, I guess we were so sound asleep we didn't hear these people knocking at the door, trying to wake us up to tell us that the barn was burning.
But they did call the fire department, and you did get the fire department
I
here.
went next door and called the fire department, and that's when they came in. That's why they came in just as I was coming down.
Well, luckily you and Phyllis were okay, because that's the most important part, and we're grateful that you were able to save what you could save. And I'll be sharing a little bit about the property and how this did not define Mr. Ingwersen and Phyllis, but Phyllis and Jim did rebuild, and rebuilt stronger than ever. And that's the most important part, is that you rebuilt stronger, and it didn't define who you are.
Yeah, we were very fortunate that there was a crew available through Mike Till, who was my architect, and they started building the studio right away, and I was trying to keep up with the builders of the plans, so I would stay up most of the day just working on ideas for the plans, and they'd say, Jim, what do you want? And I'd have to say, yeah, here, this is what I came up with last night, and finally they got the studio built. They built it all winter long, and fortunately we had a winter that was very, very mild, so they could build all winter long. They weren't slowed down by the snow or anything, so it was really, really a marvelous thing to have.
So you added the gallery on. We know that the cow barn burned. We saved the
cow barn was where my studio was,
yeah. And you rebuilt that. The hay barn, and I've got pictures where I'm going to share that. The hay barn burned to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And in place of the hay barn, which I'll show you in a little bit, you actually have another structure there, Jim. Will you tell us a little bit about the structure that is in that particular spot with the hay barn? Jim?
I put out the word that I wanted old material after the fire, and I got a phone call one day, and the fellow said, I own a log house up here in Ellison Bay, would you like it? I said, sure. So I got Fitzgerald to come and move it down, and he brought it down from Ellison Bay, and on the coldest day of January, he had it propped up on tires, or wheels I should say, and one of the wheels fell off, and so they had one jack with them that they could jack up the steel beam that the wheel was attached to, that the house was sitting on, and they jacked it up, and they couldn't get it up very high, so they had to lay it flat, and they dragged this building down on a tire that was laying flat rather than round. So it was very interesting. And my crew is here to help put it in place when it came, and they had the foundation kind of ready for it. And so it's been in that place ever since.
So I know that you rebuilt. We're going to talk a little bit about the Pomeranian Lutheran and why this property is so important, and why Jim rebuilt where he rebuilt. This property dates back to the 1860s. It's an old Pomeranian Lutheran. And I think Jim and I owe a huge thank you to a very dear friend, Alan Pape. Tell us a little bit about Alan, because we do owe a lot to him.
Alan is an expert on old barns. He can look at a barn and tell you exactly when it was made and who it was made by and how it was made, and he's just a complete expert on it. He was the founder of Old World, Wisconsin. I don't know if any of you have been to Old World, Wisconsin, but it's a fabulous place. It's outside of Milwaukee. And if you haven't visited, you should.
And I believe Alan Pape and his wife and you and Phyllis have been friends for 40 odd years. So Alan has been on the property numerous times, again this summer, and you and Phyllis have met with them out in Arizona as well as here and are very dear friends. But we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot, and I will be sharing lots of what I've learned from Alan and his wife and
Well,
Jim.
I think enough about me.
I want to say one more thing about you, Jim Ingwersen. You are a founder. You are a founder of the Door County Land Trust, and that's really extremely important. That all of us here today, and in perpetuity, are grateful to you and your friends. And can you tell us just a little bit about who else was on that group with you, Jim? And then I promise I'll stop talking and get to the property. But tell us a little bit about why and how that works, Jim.
Well, I was a member of the Environmental Council and the Door County Environmental Council for years, and they had helped me save a piece of property across the street from me at one time, our main man for the environmental group was John Wilson, and he always talked about having a land trust, and he kind of really insisted that we do it, and we all agreed with him.
Who were the 5 originals, Jim? You, John Wilson,
Virginia and Bill Yunker and Frank Failing.
okay.
And
Was there anything like this ever, Jim, the Door County Land Trust, when you began this?
no, that was so it was just a question of getting it organized. We found a young lawyer in Madison who was an expert on land trust, so we went to him and he helped us put it together. And that's how it came to be. But we did a lot of selling too of the land trust because people were very skeptical of it. They thought maybe they were going to take property off of the tax rolls, and that wasn't true at all. So.
And I believe your property, who was the first one for putting their property into the land trust, Jim?
A gal by the name of Ruth Newman. She lived outside of Bailey's Harbor. She was the first one to put her land in the land trust, and I was the second.
And back then you did it one at a time. Otherwise, you probably would have been equal in.
Yeah, right. It was all a learning process.
Well, on behalf of myself and everyone in Door County, and on behalf of everyone in Wisconsin and the world, thank you, Jim Ingwersen and the crew of 5 who made it possible that everyone anywhere can enjoy this in beautiful properties of Door County, from the marshes to the woodlands to the wetlands, and we all say thank you to you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Good. And on that note, how about we take a little walk outside, Jim, and I'll take a little walk outside with the folks, and on behalf of you, I'm honored and proud to be at your side and share a little bit about the Ingwersen legacy and all that it offers. And we'll be back in.
Carry on.
Carry on. Thanks. So let's go this way, folks.
Okay.
My name is Lisa. I do anything and everything for Mr. Ingwersen. I take care of him as well as do lots of various projects and anything and everything he asks me to do. So on that note, I'm going to walk us in a little bit of the house and head outside. Bye, Jim.
Bye. Good luck.
So this is an 1860s piece of property. I'm going to start in the middle. This is a Pomeranian Lutheran piece of property. And with this, why do we say it's Pomeranian? So I've got an assistant, Dave, who's going to show me a couple of maps real quick. Pomerania, where is it? And this is all coming from Alan Pape, so thank you, Alan. So when we look at Pomerania and think, what is Pomerania? Here's a map. It's the south side of the Baltic Sea. Why is this a... What?
It's raining. Do you want to go inside? You don't care?
No, that's so this area right here was called Pomerania. So back in the 1840s, there was lots of turmoil in Europe. Lots of turmoil. On and off, people were coming and going. There were lots of wars. But in 1845, there was a larger war, and in fact, so much so that 5.5 million people were marched out. Either you became part of a socialist country or you got out. If you were lucky enough, like the people here, you were able to have money and you were able to get on a ship, go up and down, the Great Lakes, or get on a train and find freedom, a place to worship and a place to live. So Pomerania, what are their qualities? So this piece of property that's in front of you, it has what's called a huge courtyard. And in the very center where you see that birch tree, that is the very center of the courtyard. And so that's the water source. So in Pomerania, people always had a big village. And if you think of a big wagon wheel, the center of the wagon wheel was always the source of water. So back in Pomerania, people had their entire community based on this wagon wheel. The water was in the middle. People had their buildings on the outside, and they protected each other's community as a wagon wheel. So when the Pomeranians came over here to Door County, they did the same philosophy. They, kind of like a wagon wheel. That white birch tree, and you'll see the well pump, the old well pump is in the middle. They always built a building on the north, on the south, on the west, and on the east, and they had everything else built around this wagon wheel. So those are classical things for the Pomeranians that came to Door County. This property dates back to the 1860s. How do we know that? Why do we know that? Alan Pape was here. He did some evaluations on the chinking, and we're going to take a walk over and analyze a barn and take a look. So let's go, guys. So right now you're in the middle of the courtyard. This is